Hi guys, and welcome back to another video on my channel. I'm Faiza and I make videos about things that I really like talking about, such as books and films mainly, and today I will be talking to you about the Marvel book series that came out from 2020 until 2023. There's 3 books that came out, one each year, and I'll be talking a little bit about them and telling you if they're worth reading or not. Growing up, I was a huge Marvel fan, so obviously when I heard that there is a book series about Marvel characters and their lives written in a really nice historical novel style, I really wanted to get my hands on them. But after reading all 3 novels, I have a few mixed opinions about them. Some parts are really good, some parts are arguably worse, but not necessarily bad. And I'd like to discuss a little bit about why I think each part is good or bad, depending on each character's storyline and what the author actually did with these books. My favourite one out of all of them was The Winter Soldier. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because Captain America is my favourite character in the MCU and Bucky Barnes is one of my favourite characters as well, and all of the other characters that are mainly from the Captain America franchise are really amazing in my opinion, and they're really well written, really well acted as well. So I think maybe I'm a bit biased when I say that this is the best one. I've seen a lot of people reading Loki and not really knowing that there's 2 other books. I didn't know that these 2 existed until they came up on my Goodreads. But for people who have read Loki, these 2 are quite similar to the Loki writing style in terms of the historical fiction touch. Mackenzi Lee is a historical fiction writer at core, so most of her books are historical fiction outside of the Marvel stuff that she has done. So these definitely have a touch of historical fiction, and Loki was similar as well for people who have read it. And now I think I'm just going to start introducing the actual books to you one by one and telling you what I liked and didn't like about each one. I only have a couple of them with me here today. These are the second and the third ones that came out. It's Winter Soldier Cold Front and Gamora Nebula Sisters in Arms. One of the things I really like about these books are that they have really pretty covers, as you can see here. There's another book, the first one that came out. It's called Loki, Where Mischief Lies, and I haven't got it with me today unfortunately, but I will add a picture of it so that you can see what the cover looks like. Again, it's a really beautiful cover, and I like the resemblance with the comic book characters rather than the film characters. I don't really like having real people on my book covers, so I think that these shadowy figures on the book covers are really pretty, and I think the books themselves are written in a very comic style. They're not necessarily that close to the MCU as they are to the comics that inspired the MCU films. So I think if you're a fan of the comics, you're really going to enjoy this book because it has a very different storylines from the films. I think they're meant to be quite different to the films as well. They're meant to be an alternative universe kind of thing. So if you like the Loki TV show, if you like Marvel What If, and if you like any of the new Phase 4 stuff, the multiverse idea that mainly goes around the multiverse idea, I think you're really going to enjoy these books because these actually feel like a multiverse story. And in the future, maybe a few years from now, I can see these books being developed into limited series or animated series or something. So I think from that point of view, it's good to know that if you're a Marvel fan, you like the Marvel films, you're definitely going to enjoy some bits of the books, but if you're a comic book fan, you're probably more likely to enjoy them than a film fan would. So I did read these books in chronological order. I started with Loki, which again, in the MCU films, he's one of my favourite characters, which is why I actually did enjoy reading the book a lot. There were some aspects that I think could have been better. So as a summary, I should probably warn you that there will be slight spoilers ahead, so if you don't want to know anything about it, just skip this part and just keep in mind that if you like Loki, if you like historical fiction novels, you can definitely give it a go, and everything that I've said about the books in the introduction section. The book is about Loki going to Victorian London looking for one of his old friends from Asgard, and the main story takes place in London, and Loki is much younger. If it would be a film, it would probably fit in with the MCU timeline because there's not many things that have been changed from the original Marvel films. Of course, there's the exception of Loki being on Earth for a longer time and helping out people, and there's a little bit about S.H.I.E.L.D. as well in that time. But there's not any major differences between the Marvel films and the actual book. I think the storyline for me was a bit predictable because you already know what's going to happen when he goes here and there and what's going on. You already know what's going to happen. But still, it's quite enjoyable fan of the character. If you're not, then you probably won't enjoy it as much because the storyline is very simple and it's almost written in a young adult novel kind of way, despite being historical fiction. It's not as complicated as you would expect it to be for a novel. But yeah, if you like Loki, if you like Thor, you should definitely check it out. It's got very Thor Ragnarok kind of humor, so it's got a bit of everything for everyone. I did read this book a few months ago, so it's been a while, but I don't really remember every single detail that happened in the book. I do remember the main storyline, which I just told you, but I think other than that, I do remember Loki being a little bit nicer than his usual MCU self. There's a few things about him being, you know, Odin's least favorite child and not really fitting in with the other Asgardians and that kind of thing. But other than that, it's not that complicated of a story, but I did enjoy it, so it was a 3.5 stars I think for me. It wasn't that bad that I would give it 2 or 3 stars, but it wasn't groundbreaking either, so I just gave it somewhere in the middle between, you know, 3.5 stars, maybe a bit more than the middle 2.5 stars, which I would have given another book if I didn't like the character like I like Loki, but 3.5 stars just because I think it is an enjoyable story at the end of the day. Now on to the second novel, The Winter Soldier, that I have with me. This was the one that I think I enjoyed the most, and I think from a literary point of view, it was the best written out of the 3. It did not bore me at all. I enjoyed every second of it, and I think even though it was written similar to Loki and it was young adult, it wasn't that complicated, still it was historical fiction, so I did enjoy that aspect as well. But I think overall the storyline was just much better, and this is what I really like doing with writers as well, just reading some of their earlier works and then some of their later works and comparing, because that way you can really see how far a writer has really come with their work. For Mackenzi Lee, I think that this book does show that her writing style changed a lot in just a few months from when she wrote Loki, and this one was just overall better as a book. For the summary of the book, it's entirely about Bucky Barnes, so there's absolutely nothing about Steve. There's no Steve and Bucky, so if you were someone like me who actually enjoys the Captain America side of, well, the franchise as well, you'd be a bit disappointed to see that there's not any Steve until the last few pages, and this isn't a spoiler, but there's absolutely no relationship between Steve and Bucky. They don't know each other. They're not friends in this book, and I wish someone would have told me that when I picked up this book, because that way I would have known what to expect. But yes, Steve isn't any of the main characters in the novel, and if the title's The Winter Soldier, they actually meant The Winter Soldier. That's everything that you need to know about them. And by the end of the book, there are a few moments where Steve and Bucky communicate, but I can't say that you can expect them to be best friends like they are in the MCU franchise, so that's one of the main differences from the film. Another one is that this takes place in 1954 when Bucky is the Winter Soldier already, but at the same time there's a parallel timeline, like a parallel story going on, where Bucky is a teenager, and you find out a few things about how he ends up becoming the Winter Soldier in this alternative universe, because he's obviously not going through the whole, you know, being Captain America's sidekick and fighting with him how he is in the films and the comics. So in this book he's much different. He has a lot more independence. He's much more his own character rather than just someone's sidekick, which is another aspect that I really liked. You see 16-year-old Bucky, you see a bit about his childhood and his teen years, but then again it doesn't really feel the same without Steve, which was something that I was disappointed about. But on top of that, you have Natasha Romanoff as a character as well, which again is really different because in the MCU timeline she wouldn't have even been born when this stuff was taking place. So you have her as Natalia Rostova, I think that's one of her character names in the comics as well. So she's one of Bucky's friends when he is the Winter Soldier, because if you know anything about Natasha Romanoff, she's quite linked to Hydra in her past and all of that, so that's mainly what the book plays on. The storyline itself is about Bucky being really young and being sent on a mission in the UK again, in London. I think Mackenzi Lee really likes taking Marvel characters to London for some reason. But Bucky goes to London and he's on a mission. I'm not going to tell you what, because that would be too much. And from there, things happen, and on the other side, the 1954 side, he's the Winter Soldier, making him forget. He's trying to remember, and it's a vicious cycle, really. And at the same time, he has a lot more moments with Natasha Romanoff than he has in any of the films. So I know that a lot of people really like them two together, because in the comics, Natasha and Bucky were a thing at some point. So if you're a fan of that, then definitely you can check out this. And on top of that, I think the storyline itself left me speechless for a few moments when I finished reading it. I really did enjoy it, and I did cry by the end. I'm not ashamed to admit that, because the storyline was really, really good. It wasn't the MCU film kind of good, but to me the characters still felt the same, so I like the fact that the author was quite true to the MCU characters, as well as giving the story her own originality and making the characters have a completely different life. And honestly, I think people who like reading fanfiction will enjoy something like this, and I know a lot of people who do enjoy reading and writing fanfiction, so I think if you are one of those people, you can definitely check this out. Yeah, it's probably one of the best Marvel things that I've read, because I've read quite a few fanfictions online that people have sent me. I've read comics stuff as well, and this is probably one of the better ones. And if you like reading anything related to action films or spy films, because the Winter Soldier film is has got quite a spy aesthetic to it, so if you like that kind of thing as well, then make sure to check this out. If you're curious to know the MCU moments that the author did mention in the books, the "Who the hell is Bucky" line from the Winter Soldier film appears in the book as well.
Bucky? Who the hell is Bucky?
I was really excited about. There's a few other things about Natasha's past as well that kind of link in with Hydra that some people may be aware of because of the films. And at the end of the book, this isn't a spoiler again, but there are mentions of Steve and Bucky going to Coney Island, like, you know, in the first Captain America film, they do talk about that.
Cyclone at Coney Island? Yeah, and I threw up?
So there are moments that do feel quite true to the MCU films, but the main story itself and the main things that happen to the characters are completely different. But again, it feels quite fresh, so if you do like something different, if you like the multiverse idea and you want to see Bucky in an alternative universe where he's his own man and he's not really Captain America's sidekick, but he is friends with him later on, but if you want to know more about the Winter Soldier as a character, then I definitely suggest checking this out. And one of the good things about this series is that none of the books are related to each other, so none of the characters appear in any of the other books, although obviously they're from the same universe. So if you just like one or the other of what I'm telling you, then you can definitely read them by themselves as well. You don't have to read the entire series. And that's one of the aspects I also like about this, because I find series can sometimes be really boring and you have to read the first, second, get to one of the novels that you really, really want to read. So it's not like that, you can just check any of them out anytime. The last book from the series is Gamora and Nebula, Sisters in Arms. Unfortunately, despite the fact that I'm a huge Guardians of the Galaxy fan, and despite the fact that I love everything to do with the Guardians of the Galaxy characters, and I've got action figurines of them as well, so I obviously would have had a really biased view on this book because I really like the characters. Despite all of that, I found this book dreadfully boring, because I expected the storyline to be much more exciting than what it actually is. And I think a story about the Guardians of the Galaxy characters should never be boring. I think James Gunn did a great job at making the films not be anything but boring. So I think if you're writing a book about the Guardians of the Galaxy characters, you have to at least make it up to the standard of the films as well, because fans of the films are going to expect the same kind of standard as I did. And it's, fair enough to expect something like that when you're going to go read a book about your favorite characters. What I didn't like about it is that I think the storyline, mainly being around Gamora and Nebula, should have been very, very interesting, especially with Thanos being another one of the characters. Lady Death from the comics, who is Thanos' partner in the comics, is also a character. And above all of that, the Grandmaster from Thor Ragnarok is a character. And I think the Grandmaster is probably one of the most interesting MCU characters that we don't really know a lot about. And I think the writer could have done a lot more to make him much more present in the storyline and give him a much bigger role, because the films haven't really done that. And this, I would personally see that as an opportunity to give him a much bigger role, to make him feel like a main character in the novel. And because, obviously the Thor Ragnarok storyline happens in space, which is much more different to the first Thor films, and the Guardians of the Galaxy films mainly happen in space as well. I would see this as an opportunity to bring these two worlds quite close together, because I don't think they've really properly been blended in together until now. So to me, this sounded really exciting. Oh, the Grandmaster is a character, the Collector is a character that is mentioned at some point, Thanos and Lady Death are a thing, which is only in the comics, you haven't seen that in the films yet, and obviously Gamora and Nebula, which are really interesting characters. But the storyline was just not it. It just didn't feel original, it didn't feel exciting, and I think it could have been much better, in my honest opinion. The storyline itself is about Gamora and Nebula being sent to this planet. Each one of them is sent by someone. One of them is sent by Thanos, I can't tell you which one, and the other one is sent by the Matriarch, which is another new character who I'm not entirely sure if she's a thing in the comics or not. I haven't researched that properly yet, but I think she could be. The Matriarch is just one other character, someone really powerful in the universe. I can't really give you much more than that. But each one of them is sent by one of these powerful figures to find the heart of a planet, which their respective bosses are going to give to the Grandmaster. I can't tell you much more than that, but that's one of the main storylines. The difference is that obviously the Guardians of the Galaxy characters don't appear in this. There's additional characters that I just mentioned. This is the only one actually that doesn't feel like a historical fiction story, because it takes place in space, where history is probably quite different to history on Earth, even in the MCU timeline. So there would be a completely different narrative for what goes on up there compared to what goes on Earth. But even with that, you just see the characters being much younger, so you can tell that the storyline happens a long time ago. However, I just didn't like the feel of it. I think it was quite boring. I think halfway through the book I actually decided that I would either read it really, really slowly, or just like each one chapter a day or something, because I do want to finish it and read it properly, but at the same time I know what happens in the storyline and I know what happens by the end of the book, but at the same time I'm not impressed. So it's really difficult to be motivated when you're in a moment like this where you actually want to finish the book but you don't want to at the same time. But yeah, the Winter Soldier was the only one that I can proudly say that I enjoyed, and I was incredibly surprised that there is a book like this that felt like a comfort novel almost to read, because let's be honest, it's not educational, it's not meant to be educational, it's not meant to be really deep either. It's just enjoyable, and as are the Marvel films, because I've recently seen a lot of people hate on the Marvel franchise because it's not as great as other things going on, it's not educational, it's not this, it's not that, but let's be honest, they're just made to be enjoyed. and I think that out of the three, this book does that the best. On second place would be Loki, because it's definitely a good storyline. It just wasn't the right thing for me at the time, and because it was quite predictable. And unfortunately on the third place, despite being a huge Guardians of the Galaxy fan, Gamora Nebula, which could have been much better. And it's also the longest one out of them, which is why you would have expected it to be something really interesting, but it wasn't, unfortunately. But yeah, that's my entire summary for all three books. I will add the links to my Goodreads reviews for all of these books in the link below, because maybe people want to check out more about these books and see other people's reviews as well, so definitely do check them out on Goodreads before you start reading them. And until next time, just remember to like, follow and subscribe, and thank you very much.